Hi guys, Geekonomics here. It's the 27th of November and today I'm going to bring you a little walkthrough of the A593 OCR GCSE economics paper. So that's the third of the GCSE economics papers, and that's the one which is worth 50% of the overall qualification. Why am I doing this? Number one, because my year 11 have just done this for their mock exams, and so I just want to provide a little bit of general feedback. And number two, some of my subs have been saying any chance you could do a little walkthrough of an exam paper, so that's exactly what I intend to do today. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, let's get started. So apologies ladies and gentlemen for the camera work on this one. I'll do my best to hold it steady. So what I'd like to do is I'm going to talk you through an exam paper which one of my students did last year. This was one of my GCSE students last year, and this is the marks that they got, as you can see. So this particular candidate scored 71 out of 80 marks, and that, ladies and gentlemen, was an A-star grade. Tip top. And so what I'd like to do is to use this alongside the mark scheme to just talk you through some of the ways in which this candidate has done particularly well, and things which they have done well which some of my students in year 11 need to learn from so that they can put this right and do equally as well in the June exam. So here we have it, the paper, and ladies and gentlemen, let me just sort this out so that we also have the stimulus material in front of us. There we go. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to set a few books up here, ladies and gentlemen, so that I can sort this out better. Hopefully. Maybe not. Okay, so this is the stimulus material for last year. I'm sure you'll be familiar with this, and the one for this year has already been published. So this was the stimulus material for June 2015. The first thing I'd say about the stimulus material is that it really is there to help you. So do make use of all of the information in it, particularly when you're answering the questions. This is not there to trip you up. This is definitely there to help you, so do make use of it in that respect. So let's have a look at the exam paper, question number one. So question number one is very straightforward question, but the number of people who got this wrong and the number of people in my year 11 class who got this wrong is quite remarkable actually. You're asked to simply explain what is meant by specialization. And this candidate, A-star candidate, starts this paper by actually getting the question wrong. He or she has written, specialization is being better at providing a good or service than another country in terms of output and cost. Well, that really is more a definition and an explanation of comparative advantage rather than specialization. If we flick into the mark scheme, we can see, here's the mark scheme. What's meant by specialization? Where a worker, firm, region or country concentrates on producing a narrow range of goods and services or concentrates on one stage in the production process. Very straightforward question, but remarkable the number of people that got that wrong. Let that be a lesson to you all. Next question, B1, identify. So identifies the directive word in this particular question. Identify the value of UK exports of services to France in 2011. And then identify the value of services imported into the UK from Sweden in 2011. Now that is really a very straightforward question. Here's your table. Find the exports 4.1, find the imports 1.4. And Remember, ladies and gentlemen, the units here are in billions of pounds. You must get into the habit of including the pound sign in your answer. Always include the units. So if it's the dollar, put the dollar and so on. In the questions to come later, you'll see that actually marks are taken off if you do not add the unit. Very straightforward thing to do, but also a very easy way in which you will lose marks. So don't forget to do that. So that's question 1. Moving on then to question 2. Using figures 2 and 3. So figures 2 and 3 are these figures. So we've got the value of UK exports of services in 2011, and then we've got the value of UK imports of services in 2011. So this is calculating what we would refer to as the services balance. It's not calculating the overall current account balance, so you need to be careful about that. And the questions that you're asked on this, again, fairly straightforward. So, against two components of the current account, place a tick. Very straightforward. Trade in goods and trade in services. Easy question. Part B. Using calculations, compare. Now this word compare, this directive word compare, has caused a few problems for one or two people. The word compare means generally you've got to do some type of calculation and then compare, i.e. is it higher or is it lower than another figure which you may be asked to calculate. So nota bene, the word compare. So in this one you're asked to compare the UK's balance of trade in accommodation and food services. So all you've got to do is go to the stimulus material. This is the exports. So how much does the UK export? 71 million. Find out how much they import. Go to the next page. They import 271 million. And so you simply work out the balance in this instance for accommodation and food services. So there's 71 million coming in from exports, 271 going out. So therefore there's a deficit there of minus 200 million. You then do exactly the same for information and communication services. Back to your table, look the figures for information and communication services. So that is, where is it? Information and communication services. 12.2 million. That's on the imports, that's money out. Look to your exports, 21.7 million. So you've clearly more money coming in than going out. And again, you work out what the actual figure is, and you will find that the balance on that one is 9.5 million. And that is a surplus. And you can see this candidate, they've done exactly as I've described. So they've got the exports and imports for both of these things, X and M. I hope you're familiar with those abbreviations for exports and imports. And then pointing out accommodation and food service, spelling mistake there, should be double M. Accommodation and food services has a deficit, and information and communication has a surplus. Very straightforward, 4 marks. Next question. The UK has a deficit on the current account of the balance of payments. Explain 2 possible reasons why the UK may have a deficit on the current account. So this is quite a straightforward question. You can see at the bottom here, this particular question, it's worth 6 marks. So let's see what this candidate, this A-star candidate, has written. Number 1, the UK may have a strong exchange rate. So there's their identifier, and then they get the next 2 marks for the explanation. If the exchange rate is strong, the UK currency is also strong. As a result of a high exchange rate, UK exports are expensive, So that's excellent. Identifying the fact that if your currency gets stronger, so too do the price of your exports in comparison to other countries. The high prices make UK exports less competitive, so that's price competitive obviously, and the demand for them falls. Meanwhile, imports are cheaper and the UK will import more. The decline in sales of exports and the increase in purchases of imports creates a trade deficit. That's a tremendous answer for 3 marks. Point 2. The UK may not be very good at producing goods or services and their export rate may be low. Their export rate. So that's their identifier. As a result, they have to import more to meet the rising demand in the economy. The excess of imports due to the UK having an advantage in other industries creates a current account deficit due to little export revenue. The value of imports is greater than the value of exports. Again, it's a good answer, not as good as the first one, but worth the 3 marks. So what does the mark scheme say on this one? The mark scheme says there are lots of different things that you could have discussed, and here they are. Higher wages compared to competitors, a loss of absolute advantage, a high or overvalued exchange rate, as we've talked about, a high quality of manufactured goods, low productivity growth, rapid growth in real disposable incomes, whereby you're sucking in more imports, which I guess is what our A-star candidate was hinting at, higher inflation in the UK relative to our competitors, lower interest rates, globalization. All of these factors you could use as good points of identification and then explain them in terms of your balance of payments. But bear in mind, it's not the it's the current account of the balance of payments. Don't be saying the balance of payments deficit, because obviously the balance of payments has to balance. It's the current account that we're talking about here. Okay. Next question. So now we're on to figure 4. Let's pull up figure 4 on our stimulus material. So this is figure 4, I think. Yeah. So this is talking about globalization and some of the problems associated with globalization. So you have a couple of easy starter questions again here. Explain what's meant by a negative externality. The cost on a third party as a result of an economic transaction. Excellent. Negative externalities which may occur as a result of increased world trade, pollution and global warming. Again, excellent. What's meant by global interdependence? Global interdependence is when countries become reliant on each other. And then lastly, figure 4 states that some economists have advised governments to use protectionist policies rather than free trade. Identify 2 methods of protection. Embargoes, which is a total ban, and quotas. Again, excellent. Straightforward questions. And then we get into the discussion question, the evaluate question. This, ladies and gentlemen, evaluate means provide the examiner with a 2-sided discussion and then come to a reasoned conclusion. You must conclude, and conclude on the basis of evidence. Don't say, in my opinion, X, Y, and Z. Use evidence. So what does this candidate say about the benefits of globalization? Are they greater than the costs for the UK economy? For the UK, there are many benefits of globalization. The UK can obtain goods at the lowest price possible and has an increase in choice. The UK will also receive high levels of foreign direct investment, which will stimulate economic growth and growth in wealth and rising living standards. The value of sterling will also appreciate, making sterling a strong currency. The UK will experience rising productivity levels and therefore new innovations which increase the UK's competitiveness in international markets. Tremendous. The UK will also not have a lack of skilled labour as a result of high FDI levels, which increases their overall output. So a tremendous little paragraph on the advantages there of globalisation. Now we move into the on the other hand section, so the other side of the argument. FDI is not permanent. I've written on lots of your exam papers, FDI can be footloose, and in other words, big industries, when they locate in places, if they get a better offer elsewhere, they'll just up sticks and move. So bear that in mind. The firms may leave once demand falls or cheaper labour is found, which leads to loss of jobs and loss of tax revenue for the government. Globalisation leads to loss of jobs as manufacturing firms seek to find cheap labour. The UK is also more sensitive to international crises such as a recession, which have detrimental effects on the economy. There are many environmental costs which come as a result of globalisation, which the government has to spend money on correcting. The presence of multinational companies also prevents smaller businesses being able to fully exploit themselves. Now this is excellent exam technique here, ladies and gentlemen, because this candidate has run out of space but has not started writing up the margins and along the bottom. They have said this is continued on page 14. That is good exam practice, so make sure that you do that as well. Page 14, here we continue. So the end of that particular question, they had said the presence of multinational companies prevents smaller businesses being able to fully establish themselves. Make sure that this is the correct thing we're looking at. And then here we have it. Overall, globalization, so this is the conclusion. Overall, so in summary, globalization is very beneficial in terms of economic growth. But once companies begin to leave, then there comes a rise in unemployment, which prevents the economy from growing as fast. In some cases, the costs will outweigh the benefits depending on the rate of unemployment. So you can see there's an L4 here to indicate that this is an evaluative statement and a conclusion. And this candidate got full marks for this particular question. Now again, I say to you, look at the pre-release material. There's all sorts of stuff here about the costs, negative externalities, global interdependence, increased income inequality. All of those can be used in your on the other hand. These are the disadvantages of globalization. So make use of the pre-release material. It is there to support and to help you. Okay, so let's get back then to the rest of the questions. So now we're on to question 4. Extracts 5 and 6. So extracts 5 and 6, now we're into sort of trade and protectionism basically for extracts 5 and 6. And the questions to start off with, again, fairly straightforward. What is the full name of the WTO, the World Trade Organization? Explain how the WTO promotes free trade. The WTO's role is not to introduce trade protectionist policies, as some of you wrote in your exam paper, it's to remove them. So to remove trade barriers, and again, very straightforward for 2 marks. Okay, B, 4B. Analyse how a fall in a country's export trade might affect that country's economy. The word analyse here, ladies and gentlemen, a lot of you have struggled with this. And it's really very straightforward. First of all, when you see the word analyse, I would encourage you to draw a diagram. Now this candidate has drawn it, it just hasn't come out very well on the scanned image. But you should really draw a diagram, and that will help you so much, because when you describe a diagram you are analysing, and it will just help you so much to do that. So what's this candidate written? If a country's export trade falls, they can get a larger current account deficit. Often the trade in goods or services is deeply in a deficit, that the debt is almost impossible to pay off. Due to the fall in sales, there will be less output required. Right, I would ignore that little bit there about the debt. I'll say something about that in a moment. Therefore, many workers will be laid off as their disposable incomes fall. Demand in the economy falls. This continues as the multiplier is in reverse. This is tremendous, talking about the negative multiplier effect. The rise in unemployment means that there will be a greater cost to the government as they try and use fiscal policy to increase the economy's productive capacity. Now really, this candidate, they've done enough really already to get the marks for this. Basically, draw a diagram, show aggregate demand falling as a consequence of exports falling, show that that means the economy may indeed start to contract, the consequences of that being increased unemployment. That is really all you've got to do here. I said when we looked at this question about this candidate's comment on debt, too many of you are confusing the trade deficit, which means the country is earning less from exports than it is spending on imports. And there is a deficit there which does require borrowing, but that is not borrowing with regard to the government budget, the budget deficit. You must not confuse what we would refer to as the budget balance with the balance on what would be the financial account of the balance of payments. Too many of you are getting those things mixed up. You must not do that. That's something we'll have to look at again. Okay, next question. Focusing on figures 7, 8 and 9. So let's get figures 7, 8 and 9 up here. Alright, so this is figure 7. When you get a table like this, expect to be asked to compare data. And as I said before, compare does not simply mean, oh, tell me what, read the figures off. Compare means do something with the figures, do a calculation. And that's why many of you didn't get full marks in these particular next series of questions. So using figure 7, compare the level of national income per capita in Benin with the UK. It's not sufficient to just look at the national income per capita figures. Here, $800 compared to 37,780. You can't just read those off and expect to get the marks. You've got to do a calculation, and the calculation is simply tell me how much greater the UK's GDP per capita is than Benin. Now, it doesn't tell you to do that explicitly, but it is explicit in this word compare. So this candidate's written GDP per capita in Benin is such and such, in the UK it's such and such, which is around 47 times higher. The UK has a much higher GDP per capita than Benin, and you see the double tick there for 2 marks. Using figure 7, calculate the total level of national income in Benin. So you know that per person it's $800. You know the population is 9.4 million, so multiply 800 by 9.4 million and that'll give you your answer. There we go, 7.52 billion. Now the exam board, they do this deliberately. They want to see, do you know the difference between millions, billions and trillions? And so this is why they give you this data, to manipulate it, to test you. So I know it's obvious, but make sure you know how many zeros are in a million, how many in a billion, how many in a trillion. Next question. Using figure 8, compare the number of people in poverty in Nigeria with the number in 1980 compared with 2010. Again, it's not sufficient just to read off, in 1980 it was 17.1 million, in 2010 it was 112.47 million. calculate the difference or calculate the percentage change or something like that if it says compare. So you can see this candidate's done the calculation. They've worked out that it's 647.7% higher in 2010 than in 1980. Tremendous. And then finally, explain what's meant by absolute poverty, living on less than $1 a day. Straightforward question, that. Okay, figure 9. Poverty level, policies to reduce poverty. You struggled with this, my class, you struggled. Let's see what this A-star candidate's written. A government may aim to reduce poverty through supply-side policies by introducing greater levels of education and training. The policies would have time lags, but would overall be very effective in reducing the likelihood of poverty in the future. By educating and training a workforce, you're providing them with the necessary skills to become self-sufficient and work rather than depend on state benefits. Their higher human capital means they are more likely to be employed. The rise in employment means their GDP per capita and disposable income will rise. Supply-side policies would be very effective in the long run. And of course, the supply-side policy is the education and training. So this is an evaluate question. And bear in mind, evaluate means that you've got to discuss it. But your discussion can be, as this candidate has done, tell me, evaluate why you think that this would work so well, which is what this candidate has done. You could evaluate by saying, however, there are time lags associated with supply-side policies, and so this policy would take such a long time to implement. So on the other hand, it's maybe not the best policy in the short term. That's reasonable to use as well. The government may also use fiscal policy to generate employment. By creating a budget deficit, which is of course expansionary, they're making more jobs for the population. The excess spending provides opportunities for the people as more positions become readily available. Fiscal policy is a good response to poverty because people won't have to pay as much tax and state benefits will be cancelled after they make a certain amount of money. Fiscal policy would be very effective, so this is the evaluative statement, in reducing poverty because it has relatively quick results. The immediacy of the policy helps to cause a fall in poverty and quickly. So that's a lovely answer again. Now the mark scheme identifies a number of policies which you could refer to, and the mark scheme identifies the following. Let's get it in front of us. 5D. So you could identify the use of progressive income taxes. You could identify using increasing welfare to reduce poverty, education and training as mentioned, the government provision of basic necessities, subsidies to reduce the price of basic necessities, the introduction of a national minimum wage. Maybe you'd like to comment on the national living wage as of next April. So all sorts of things that you could have included in that question. Okay, 6, last 2 questions. Explain what's meant by foreign aid. Again, very straightforward. Just say that it's money and it's given to foreign countries. Other than foreign aid, give an example. Other than aid for trade, give an example of foreign aid. Again, there's a long list. Grants by governments, provision of money, provision of machinery, provision of specialist skills, low interest loans, commonly referred to as soft loans, the provision of emergency aid, free university education for foreign students in the donor country, tied aid. So tied aid is aid which is then, it does carry some, it does carry some consequences with it. So in this case linked to buying exports from the donor country. Bilateral or multilateral aid or debt relief. Any of those, state one.